And we're back with On the Record with Kevin and
Tiffany
on 9:30 a.m. The Answer. All right, Tiff. I know you don't like to get too controversial, but I want to talk about a big issue right now is support for the war in Ukraine.
With controversy. I'm not okay with controversy for the sake of controversy.
Sometimes that's the best one to have is controversy for the sake of controversy.
I like solutions. I don't like nonsense and just talking trash.
Well, let's talk about one. Let's talk about Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. Right now, Republicans there's quite a few of us that are not pro-war in Ukraine. I know a lot of people in leadership in the party are for it, but common people, we're not. Let's talk about that. And let me give you my view on that, why I think that's the way that it is, right? My feel on that is that when it comes to Americans, right, helping Americans, keeping jobs here for Americans, everything becomes a matter of cost versus benefit, right? The dollar amount. They literally measure this in dollars. That's what caused the issue in Palestine, Ohio. That's why we have the issue in Jackson, Mississippi. It was a measurement of dollars. How much it's going to cost versus what can we get out of it? But yet in Ukraine, they are throwing billions of dollars at this situation with no thought of expense. And that's the problem that I have. That's one of the problems I have. Second problem I have is that I remember going into the war in Iraq. I was like 28. I was 30. It's about 30, 31. I was very pro-war in Iraq. I was like, hey, let's go. Let's do it. Now I'm like, whoa.
Everybody was.
What are the consequences of this?
Most people were.
So that's one of the things there is that when it comes to Americans and preserving American lives, American jobs, it becomes a matter of how much is it going to cost us versus how much we're going to cost and how much are we going to get out of it? What's the net profit? Versus when we help non-Americans, it's let's give them whatever they need, as much money as they need. So what's your comment on that?
I think most people are in favor of helping the Ukrainians because of general principle, freedom.
Okay.
The general principle of freedom, which is what our country embodies.
Okay.
Okay, so that's one thing. These are separate issues. I think you're correct about the dollars. And let's get more specific. What should happen as Americans? When we went through this pandemic, one of the first things that we found out was that most of the world's resources, not just this nation, but the world's resources, were coming from the Wuhan province, which is where a lot of manufacturing is located. In that, let's look at dollars in that through that lens. The United States. Many businesses will say, well, it's too expensive you can't produce anything in the United States. It's too expensive. It's too expensive not to produce things in the United States. Look at what we just went through in terms of a pandemic and what we continue to experience after the pandemic in terms of supply chain shortages.
Yeah, and I think there has to be this difference between understanding what the free market economy can actually solve versus what government can solve. Now, look, I know Republicans we've been raised to think that, hey, government is the problem. Not so much. Let's pause that because that essentially has become a slogan within a lot of the party.
No, what we've been raised to think is that big government control of a whole bunch of stuff and government input on a bunch of things is problematic, and that still remains true. But the government oversight that is needed on things like, for example, in healthcare, public-private partnerships, we've seen very successful ones in the United States. So to say government is bad is not true. But when we're talking about business, building business here, where government has been remiss, I would say, is in notions where everything is so siloed and polarized. We will not count dollars when it comes down to a war that's being fought on foreign soil. fought by foreign entities, but we will count dollars when we're talking about giving incentives to American businesses to build American infrastructure. Because guess what? When that war is over, we're going to give dollars to that nation to help build their infrastructure back. Guaranteed. Guaranteed we're going to do that.
So let me push back on you.
So why aren't we doing that to build an infrastructure that we know needs to be built in this nation?
This is true.
And at least in allied nations that are, and think it through, allied nations that, the word that I just said there, allied, not nations that have already tried to blow us up and do all kinds of other things. And we're like, oh, let's go build them up. No. Allied nations in our hemisphere. It makes sense.
Yeah, but it still comes back down to like you said, right? When it comes to helping Americans, when it comes to preserving American jobs, right? We count dollars and cents, but when it comes to non-Americans, we tend to be open. We open our purses.
We
and it's
open
unlimited.
our purse strings, and we count the value of the intangible, like freedom. Yet we don't count the value of the intangible of sovereignty, which is what having our own built out economic system that encompasses us being complementary to business and to educating our workforce. And as you hear often in those private business meetings, retooling people. Yeah, having a real plan for retooling.
Let me
not
tell you
just,
what retooling.
People will get retooled.
Okay, I'm going to quote one of the people I disagree with like 1,000,000 times to one a lot is Tucker Carlson, where he was asked the question on my least favorite person in the conservative hemisphere, Ben Shapiro, right? And let me digress a little bit. I always laugh when I see Ben Shapiro, who is he graduated from Harvard Law School, as he goes out and he argues with essentially a bunch of novices, right? But he never really took that law degree, went in and practiced law with the big boys, right? So that's my gripe about him. But Tucker said something because he was asked the question: if you have a technology that's going to put tens of millions of Americans out of work, what do you do in that situation, right? And I agree with Tucker. You pause that technology and you have to figure something out, because that technology is self-driving cars, right? Self-driving trucks and cars. Trucking is is the number one employer of males. It doesn't matter of American males. Number one. Right, and from Ben Shapiro's perspective, you just let the technology come in, wipe out the jobs of other Americans, right? Because they should have chosen better, right? They should have made better choices, and they wouldn't be in this situation. Which is complete BS, right? But that's how that decision is made, right? So these people will support wiping out American jobs, but yet open up our wallets and pocketbooks to non-Americans because we're doing it on something beyond just dollars and cents. We're doing it based on the intangibles, as you said, intangible values, the quality of life. Right? When we don't do that here with our own people. We use slogans, right? We use slogans to bamboozle us, right? And not really focus on the real specific issue.
Well, let's take it down to one industry. And it depends on who's, because you got the AI people about to make a truckload of money. You got the trucking industry, the industry itself that's going to be making money, because if you look at that, what is the reason why it's okay is because the loss would be the expense of the trucker. That's an expense to that industry.
Yeah, that's considered a human resource that can be retooled.
Let's go look at dialysis. We've got a pill that's been around for 10 years that slows or stops the progression of kidney disease. A series of pills. It's a family of drugs called SGLT2Is. That's sodium glucose transporter 2 inhibitors. It's a class of drugs. Some of the names you would know would be Farxiga and Jardiance and Evocana. Yep. Those drugs impede or positively affect diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and slow or stop the progression of kidney disease when detected when applied to kidney patients in stages 1, 2, and 3 of kidney disease. all kinds of data supporting it. The kidney world is saying that it's transformative, yet it's not being prescribed.
Or it's been prescribed
it's
at
not
low
being
rates.
prescribed to the rate that it should be.
Yeah.
And most people don't even know that this exists. You know, it would affect all sorts of things, amputations, but because you've got an industry on the back end of this, right? And that industry can lobby. They have lobbyists. They have all this stuff. Truck drivers, the individual truck driver doesn't have a lobbyist.
No, nobody cares.
You know, their unions may.
Well, they don't have unions. We become
not
anti-union, right? And that's
You
that's
know-
pushed by the party. The party is very much anti-union.
But I'm saying that there's not the dollars put into that representation as there is put into representation for the PACs, et cetera, for that industry. So you see conversation happening in research circles around the world, but specifically in this nation. How do we get the doctors to prescribe the drugs?
How do we do that, Tiffany?
How do we do that? Well, we had to make a decision that what we were going to do. Texas Kidney Foundation did, which was take to the airwaves and tell them.
Yeah, and so what you find, and this,
But I say all of that to say, that's what you're looking at here. Is that in that case, everything's protecting this industry. We can't just run all these folks out of business. How do we get the doctors to do that? And how do we slow this down? And how do we, because that could impact 80% of the people going on going on dialysis. Yes, that could impact 80% of their business. Yes, that means 80% of the people who are going on dialysis wouldn't go on dialysis. So the people would be helped, but they don't have a PAC.
well, so it's really, do we help the masses or do we help the few, the elite? Is what it comes down to.
It's who's got the voice in it.
Yeah.
Whose bottom line is being affected.
Let's take this up in the next segment. I want to discuss that with you. So you've been listening to On the Record with Tiffany and Kevin on 9:30 a.m. The Answer, home of conservative talk radio.